The gavel cracked like thunder and I watched Carol Whitfield's face drain white as the judge spoke the words she never thought she'd hear. The Homeowners Association's rules, the judge said, are hereby declared void and unenforceable against this homeowner. 6 months earlier, I never imagined a hurricane would lead me to a courtroom against the woman who ran our neighborhood like her personal kingdom. My name is Daniel Reyes, 42 years old, a structural engineer and a homeowner in Palmetto Cove, Florida. I bought my house with my late father's insurance money, the one thing he left me before cancer took him. Palmetto Cove looked perfect from the outside, palm-lined streets, manicured lawns, a community pool that sparkled like a postcard. But behind the white picket fences lived a woman named Carol Whitfield, HOA president, self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac. Carol had run the board for 11 years and nobody dared challenge her, not even the other board members. I'd heard the rumors before I moved in, fines for mailbox colors, warnings over grass height measured in millimeters. I told myself I'd keep my head down, mow my lawn and mind my business. That plan lasted exactly 4 months, until Hurricane Marisol tore through our coastline in September. The storm ripped my roof clean off, shattered 2 windows and flooded half my living room. I stood in the wreckage the next morning, coffee in hand, staring at the sky through a hole where my ceiling used to be. My neighbor Frank, an ex-Marine with a gruff voice and a soft heart, helped me tarp what was left. Get it fixed fast, Frank warned me. Carol's already circling like a vulture, taking pictures of damaged houses. I laughed it off then. I had no idea how right he was. Within 72 hours, I filed my insurance claim, hired a licensed contractor and began emergency repairs. I needed my roof fixed before the next storm system rolled in. This wasn't optional. It was survival. On day 5, I found a yellow envelope taped to my front door, HOA letterhead glaring in bold red ink. Inside was a notice of architectural violation. Apparently my temporary blue tarp violated the community's aesthetic guidelines. I actually laughed out loud, standing in my gutted living room, holding a fine notice for a tarp over a hole in my roof. I called the HOA office, expecting a mistake. Instead, I got Carol Whitfield herself, sickly sweet on the phone. Rules are rules, Mr. Reyes, she said. Hurricane or not, standards must be maintained in Palmetto Cove. I explained my contractor was already scheduled, that FEMA inspectors had cleared the property, that I was doing everything right. Carol didn't care. She informed me the tarp had to be HOA approved beige, within 48 hours or fines would double daily. I hung up the phone, hands shaking, not from fear but from disbelief that anyone could be this petty during a disaster. That night, I drove to the hardware store and searched 3 counties for HOA-approved beige tarps. They didn't exist. I called Carol back, calm as I could manage, explaining no supplier carried that specific product during a hurricane shortage. Her response chilled me. That's not my problem. Perhaps you should have planned better, Mr. Reyes. I realized then this wasn't about beige tarps. This was about power and she intended to use every ounce of it. The fines started stacking, $200 a day, then $500, then a lien threat mailed to my mortgage company. I tried appealing to the board, but Carol controlled every seat, every vote, every signature that mattered. Board member Denise Park quietly pulled me aside at the mailbox. Off the record? Nobody crosses Carol and wins. I asked her why not and she just shook her head, glancing nervously toward Carol's house like it might be listening. Something told me Denise knew more than she was saying, a flicker of guilt behind her eyes I couldn't ignore. My contractor, Miguel, warned me the roof repair would take 3 weeks minimum, given hurricane season material shortages across the state. I explained this to Carol in a certified letter, attaching my contractor's timeline and my insurance adjuster's report. She sent back a single line: the board does not negotiate deadlines. Compliance is compliance. Frank told me something odd one evening over beers on my ruined porch. Carol's own roof got emergency approved in half the time. Different rules for different houses, Frank muttered, shaking his head. Always have been. I started noticing it too, a permit here, a violation waived there, all favoring Carol's inner circle of friends. My neighbor across the street, an elderly widow named Mrs. Alvarez, had been fined for a wheelchair ramp built after her hip surgery. Carol called it an unauthorized structure altering the community aesthetic. Mrs. Alvarez was 81 years old. That was the moment something shifted in me. This wasn't just my fight anymore. I began quietly documenting everything: photos, emails, certified letters, dates, times, every single interaction with the board. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it. I just knew instinct told me to keep every scrap of paper. Twist number 1 arrived on a rainy Tuesday. I found an old community newsletter mentioning Carol wasn't even elected. She was appointed after a resignation. I dug further and discovered the previous HOA president had quit abruptly, citing personal reasons nobody ever explained. Something about that resignation nagged at me, a loose thread I couldn't stop pulling. Meanwhile, my fines crossed $4,000 and a lien notice arrived threatening my home's title. I sat at my kitchen table, tarp flapping above me in the wind, staring at numbers that could cost me my father's house. I thought about giving up, paying whatever she wanted, just to make it stop. Then I thought about Mrs. Alvarez's wheelchair ramp fine and something in me hardened instead of broke. I decided I wasn't going to fold. I was going to fight, smart, quiet and patient. I called a real estate attorney named Priya Chandrasekhar, recommended by a coworker who'd survived her own HOA nightmare. Priya listened to my story for 20 minutes without interrupting, then said 4 words that changed everything: send me everything. Now. She reviewed my HOA's governing documents and found something explosive. Florida law suspends certain HOA enforcement powers during declared states of emergency. Your governor declared a state of emergency the day the hurricane hit, Priya said. Carol may have no legal authority here at all. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than exhaustion. I felt hope, sharp and quiet. But Priya warned me, don't tip your hand yet. Let her keep making mistakes. Every fine she issues now becomes evidence. I decided to play along, at least on the surface, while building my case in the shadows. I responded to Carol's letters politely, always documenting, always keeping copies, never revealing what I knew. Carol seemed to enjoy my apparent submission, growing bolder with every notice she sent. She started showing up personally, walking past my house with a clipboard, photographing every angle of my roof. One afternoon she knocked on my door, uninvited, smiling like a shark scenting blood in the water. I just want to help you understand the seriousness of this, Daniel, she said, using my first name like we were friends. I invited her in, calm as still water, and let her talk herself into a corner on my recorded doorbell camera. She admitted, on camera, that she knew about my insurance claim and simply didn't care about the timeline. That recording became evidence piece number 1. The first nail in a coffin she didn't know I was building. 2 weeks later, the HOA scheduled an emergency board meeting, allegedly to discuss repeat violators in the community. I attended, sitting quietly in the back row, watching Carol perform for her small, loyal audience. She projected photos of my tarp on a screen, calling it an eyesore threatening our property values. I raised my hand and calmly asked whether the board was aware of the governor's emergency declaration suspending such enforcement. The room went silent. Carol's smile flickered, just for a second, like a light bulb about to die. That doesn't apply to aesthetic violations, she snapped, though her voice cracked slightly on the word aesthetic. I didn't push further. I simply thanked the board and sat back down, letting the doubt spread on its own. Denise Park caught my eye across the room, and for the first time, she didn't look away. After the meeting, Denise approached me in the parking lot, glancing over her shoulder like she was being watched. There's more you don't know, she whispered. Carol's been doing this for years. I have old files if you want them. My pulse quickened. Twist number 2 was unfolding right in front of me. Denise handed me a flash drive 2 days later, meeting me at a coffee shop 3 towns away, far from Palmetto Cove. On it were years of complaints against Carol, fines waived for friends, fines doubled for people who'd challenged her authority. One file detailed a homeowner who'd been forced into foreclosure after HOA liens stacked faster than he could pay. That homeowner's name was Robert Kessler. He'd since moved away, but Denise had his last known contact information. I called Robert that night. He answered warily, but once I mentioned Carol's name, His voice changed completely. She destroyed my family, he said quietly. I lost my house because of a fence that was 2 inches too tall. Robert agreed to testify if it ever came to that. Still bitter after 3 years? Still hungry for justice. My case was growing, piece by piece, into something far bigger than a beige tarp dispute. Meanwhile, my roof repair finally began. 3 weeks after the storm. Exactly as Miguel had predicted. Carol filed a lien against my property the same week construction started, claiming willful non-compliance. Priya reviewed the lien and found a critical error. Carol had filed it under the wrong statute, invalidating it on a technicality. She's sloppy, Priya said, almost gleefully. Power makes people careless. That carelessness is our weapon. We decided not to challenge the lien immediately. Instead, we let it sit, gathering more of Carol's mistakes. Twist number 3 hit hard. Priya discovered Carol wasn't just HOA president. She also worked part-time for the county's code enforcement office. That meant a potential conflict of interest, using her government position to intimidate homeowners into compliance. I felt sick reading that. This wasn't just petty tyranny anymore. This was abuse of actual legal power. Priya suggested filing a formal complaint with the state's HOA regulatory division, using everything we'd gathered so far. We drafted the complaint carefully, citing Florida Statute 720, the emergency declaration and Robert Kessler's foreclosure case. Before filing, Priya wanted one more piece, proof Carol had personally profited from her position somehow. That's when Frank, my ex-Marine neighbor, dropped a bombshell over our nightly porch beers. Carol's brother-in-law owns the roofing company she always recommends to approved homeowners, Frank said. Grinning, my jaw actually dropped. Carol had been steering neighbors toward her family's business for years, disguised as HOA guidance. Priya's eyes lit up when I told her. That's not just a conflict of interest, Daniel. That's potential fraud. We subpoenaed the roofing company's records through a preliminary legal request and the numbers were staggering. Over $400,000 in HOA-approved contracts had gone to Carol's brother-in-law's company in 3 years. Homeowners who used other contractors faced delays, denials and fines. Homeowners who used her family's company sailed through. This was the smoking gun. This was the twist that would eventually bring her entire kingdom crashing down. We still needed to move carefully. Though, Carol was smart, connected and had spent a decade covering her tracks. I kept my roof repair going, kept paying fake compliance with a straight face, kept my evidence growing quietly. Carol, sensing my apparent weakness, grew even bolder, escalating her attacks against me publicly. She started a neighborhood group chat, posting my violation history for all 200 families in Palmetto Cove to see. Neighbors I'd known for months started avoiding eye contact, whispering as I walked past with my dog. It stung more than I expected. Reputation, once poisoned, spreads faster than any TARP violation ever could. But I noticed something interesting. A few neighbors started reaching out privately, sharing their own Carol horror stories. A pattern emerged. Dozens of families had similar tales, silenced by fear of fines, liens and public humiliation. I realized Carol's power depended entirely on isolation, keeping homeowners fighting alone, never comparing notes. So I quietly started organizing, one conversation at a time, building a coalition Carol never saw coming. Twist number 4 arrived through Mrs. Alvarez, of all people, sweet, quiet Mrs. Alvarez with her wheelchair ramp fine. She revealed that decades ago, before Carol took over the board, she and Carol's late husband had been close friends. Something happened between them, Mrs. Alvarez wouldn't say exactly what, that turned Carol cold toward her forever. She's punishing me for something that happened 30 years ago, Mrs. Alvarez confided, eyes glistening. That's the real reason for the ramp fine. I realized then Carol's tyranny wasn't purely financial. Some of it was deeply, disturbingly personal. That revelation didn't excuse anything. If anything, it made Carol's abuse of power feel even more dangerous. My roof repair finished in early October, inspected and approved by the county, fully compliant with every actual building code. I sent Carol formal notice of completion, documented with photos, permits and inspector signatures. She responded within an hour, somehow finding a new violation. My gutters were the wrong shade of white. I nearly laughed at the absurdity, but Priya just smiled. Let her keep digging. She's building her own grave. We filed the regulatory complaint that week. Submitting everything, fines? Yeah. The conflict of interest? Robert Kessler's testimony. The state's HOA division confirmed receipt and opened a formal investigation within 10 business days. Carol had no idea yet. She was too busy measuring my gutter color with a paint swatch card. Meanwhile, my coalition of frustrated neighbors grew to 15 families, each contributing evidence of their own mistreatment. We started meeting secretly at Frank's garage, going over Roberts's usable notice. Treatment stories over folding chairs and cheap pizza. Twist number 5. One member, a quiet accountant named Tom, discovered Carol had been misappropriating HOA reserve funds for years. Tom had accessed public financial disclosures and found discrepancies totaling nearly $80,000 over 5 years. Landscaping invoices padded, maintenance contracts inflated, money quietly funneled toward accounts Tom couldn't fully trace. We added this to our growing file. Understanding now this wasn't just about power anymore. This was fraud. Plain and simple. Priya suggested it was time to escalate beyond the regulatory complaint. This needed a civil lawsuit. Possibly criminal referral. I hesitated. Lawsuits meant money, time, stress I wasn't sure I had left in me after everything. You don't have to do this alone anymore, Priya reminded me. 15 families are standing with you now. That truth steadied me more than anything else had in months. I wasn't just fighting for my roof anymore. We filed a class action lawsuit against the Palmetto Cove HOA, naming Carol Whitfield personally as a defendant. The lawsuit cited fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, discriminatory enforcement and violation of the emergency declaration statute. News of the lawsuit spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, faster than any group chat Carol ever controlled. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across Carol's face when she saw me at the mailbox. She tried a new tactic: sweetness. She offered to waive all fines if I quietly dropped the lawsuit. I almost laughed at how transparent it was. This wasn't mercy. This was panic wearing a friendly mask. I declined, politely, and told her the offer needed to go to 15 other families too. Not just me. Carol's polite mask slipped completely then, and for one unguarded second, I saw the real fury underneath. You'll regret this, she hissed, before catching herself and forcing another sickly smile back onto her face. That threat got added to Priya's growing file, recorded discreetly on my phone in my jacket pocket. The HOA's insurance company got involved, sending their own investigators to interview board members separately. Denise Park, our secret ally, finally spoke on record, corroborating everything Robert, Tom and Mrs. Alvarez had shared. Twist number 6 landed like a bomb. The state investigation revealed Carol had never actually been re-elected in 6 years. Her appointments were fabricated through falsified meeting minutes, forged signatures, and a board that rubber-stamped everything blindly. Legally, Carol Whitfield hadn't held valid authority as HOA president since the fabricated election 3 terms ago. Every fine, every lien, every violation notice she'd issued in that time was potentially void from the start. I sat with that revelation for a long time, understanding the sheer scale of what she'd gotten away with. My $4,000 in fines suddenly felt small next to the hundreds of thousands she'd cost the community. Carol tried desperately to control the narrative, calling an emergency town hall to clear up misunderstandings. Nearly the entire neighborhood showed up, more people than any HOA meeting had ever drawn before. Carol stood at the podium, visibly rattled, sweat beading despite the air conditioning running full blast. She tried her usual tactics: deflection, technical jargon, blaming misinformation spread by disgruntled homeowners. Then Tom stood up, holding printed financial records, and calmly asked her to explain the $80,000 discrepancy. The room went dead silent. Carol's mouth opened, but no smooth answer came out this time. Robert Kessler, who'd driven 3 hours to attend, stood next and told the room about losing his home. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several neighbors I'd never spoken to looked genuinely horrified, hands over their mouths. Mrs. Alvarez, frail but resolute, stood with help from her cane and described the wheelchair ramp fine in detail. "I'm 81 years old," she said, voice trembling but clear. "She fined me for helping myself walk." Carol's composure cracked completely then. She grabbed her purse and walked out mid-meeting, abandoning the podium entirely. The board members remaining looked at each other, humiliated, realizing they'd enabled this for years without question. That night, our coalition grew to over 40 families, all willing to join the lawsuit or provide testimony. Twist number 7 arrived from an unexpected source. Carol's own sister, estranged for years, reached out to Priya directly. She revealed Carol had done something similar at a previous HOA in another state, forced to resign quietly under threat of exposure. That community had settled privately, with a non-disclosure agreement burying the entire scandal from public record. Priya subpoenaed those old records too, building an unmistakable pattern of behavior spanning over a decade. The judge presiding over our case, upon reviewing preliminary evidence, granted an emergency injunction freezing all HOA fines against every homeowner. Carol's lawyer, clearly overwhelmed by the mounting evidence, requested an emergency meeting with Priya to discuss settlement options. Priya laughed, during the phone call. "Your client committed fraud against 40 families. There's no settlement small enough." Carol tried one last desperate move, claiming health issues, requesting the case be delayed indefinitely for medical reasons. The judge, unimpressed, denied the delay, citing the urgency and scale of harm already documented against the community. Discovery continued for weeks, unearthing even more damning details buried in years of falsified HOA records. Twist number 8. Carol's brother-in-law's roofing company had been paying her personal kickbacks disguised as consulting fees. Bank records showed monthly deposits matching almost exactly the timeline of every approved roofing contract in the neighborhood. This wasn't just a conflict of interest anymore. This was clear, documented, prosecutable financial fraud. The county's code enforcement office, alerted to Carol's dual role, launched their own internal investigation into her conduct. She was placed on unpaid leave pending review, stripping her of the government authority she'd weaponized against homeowners. Meanwhile, Robert Kessler's foreclosure case got reopened, with new evidence suggesting the original lien had been fraudulent from inception. A local news station picked up the story, running a segment titled HOA President's Reign of Terror Exposed. The story went semi-viral online, with homeowners from other Florida communities sharing eerily similar Carol Whitfield stories. Turns out, before Palmetto Cove, she'd cycled through 3 other HOAs, always leaving chaos and quiet settlements behind her. I watched the news segment with Frank on my porch, the same porch where this whole fight had started. "Never thought a beige tarp would end a woman's decade-long crime spree," Frank said, shaking his head with a grin. I laughed for the first time in months. Real laughter. The kind that loosens something tight in your chest. The trial date arrived faster than expected, moved up due to the sheer volume of corroborating evidence presented. I sat in the courtroom gallery, watching Carol Whitfield enter looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her expensive blazer hung differently now, like armor that no longer fit the person wearing it. Priya laid out the case methodically: fraudulent elections, falsified minutes, discriminatory enforcement, embezzled reserve funds, illegal kickbacks. Witness after witness took the stand: Robert, Tom, Mrs. Alvarez, Denise, even Carol's estranged sister via video testimony. Carol's attorney tried to poke holes, but the evidence was simply too thorough, too well documented, too damning. On the final day, the judge called for closing arguments and the courtroom held its breath collectively. Priya's closing statement was surgical. "This isn't about tarps or gutters, Your Honor. This is about a decade of unchecked abuse." She reminded the court of the governor's emergency declaration, the one Carol had ignored to fine a hurricane victim. "My client rebuilt his father's house after a storm," Priya said. The defendant tried to bury him in paperwork instead of helping. Carol's attorney offered a weak defense, arguing she genuinely believed in her authority, ignorance rather than malice. The bank records, the falsified minutes and the kickback payments made that defense collapse almost instantly. The judge recessed for deliberation and I spent 2 agonizing hours in the hallway with Frank and Priya. When we returned, the judge's expression gave nothing away, calm and measured as she prepared to speak. The court finds, she began, that the Palmetto Cove HOA board, under Carol Whitfield's leadership, engaged in a pattern of fraud. She ruled every fine issued during the state of emergency void, citing the exact statute Priya had found months earlier. She ruled Carol's presidency itself invalid, given years of falsified elections and fabricated meeting records. Then came the words I'd waited months to hear. The Homeowners Association's rules are hereby declared void and unenforceable against this homeowner. Carol's face drained of color, exactly as I'd pictured it during every sleepless night of this fight. The judge ordered restitution, every improperly collected fine refunded, with interest, to over 40 affected families. She referred the embezzlement and kickback evidence to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. Carol was permanently barred from serving on any HOA board within the state of Florida, effective immediately. Robert Kessler's foreclosure case was reopened separately, with strong grounds for reversing the fraudulent original ruling. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but I found myself searching the crowd for one person instead, Mrs. Alvarez. She stood near the steps, cane in hand, tears streaming freely down her weathered face. 30 years, she whispered when I reached her. It took 30 years, but somebody finally saw me. I hugged her carefully, feeling the weight of everything we'd all carried finally begin to lift. Weeks later, Carol was formally charged with fraud, embezzlement and falsifying official records by the district attorney. She faced potential years in prison, alongside a civil judgment ordering her to personally repay the misappropriated funds. Her house, ironically, went up for sale within a month. Unable to keep up appearances any longer, I heard she moved out of state entirely, chasing a fresh start somewhere nobody knew her name yet. Palmetto Cove held new board elections, transparent and properly supervised this time, with Denise Park voted in as president. Denise's first act was implementing strict financial transparency rules and an independent audit system nobody could manipulate again. Twist number 9. The final one. Denise revealed she'd started secretly gathering evidence against Carol 2 years before I ever moved in. I just needed someone brave enough, or stubborn enough, to finally light the match, she told me, smiling. Turns out my beige tarp violation had been the spark an entire community secretly needed all along. My house stood fully repaired by winter. Roof solid, gutters whatever color I wanted them to be. I planted new grass in my yard. No HOA-approved height requirement dictating how tall it could grow. Frank and I sat on my porch most evenings now, beers in hand, watching a neighborhood slowly heal itself. Mrs. Alvarez's wheelchair ramp stayed exactly where it was. Permanent, protected, never questioned again. Robert Kessler eventually won his case too, receiving compensation for the home he'd lost years before. I won't pretend the victory came without cost, months of stress, legal fees, sleepless nights I'll never fully forget. But sitting on my porch that winter, watching my neighbors wave instead of whisper, I understood the price had been worth it. Carol Whitfield once told me rules were rules. No exceptions, no mercy, no room for humanity. In the end, it was the law itself, the real law, that finally held her accountable for everything. My father's house stood strong again, storm-proofed, paid for, finally, trulimine, free of anyone else's control. Justice doesn't always come fast, but sometimes, it comes complete, and that morning in court, it finally did.